Good morning and welcome back. This is the Catholic Lady, and we are reading Great Lion of God by Taylor Caldwell. We have reached part 3, which is titled Apostle to the Gentiles. And this goes into more length as to the part where Paul actually begins his ministry. Part 1 was his early life. Part 2 was his persecution of the Christians, and then his conversion. And now at part 3, we're going on to his mission, and this will complete the book. I hope you've been enjoying it. I hope if you've been setting this up to be listened to by a family member that perhaps cannot read or is incapacitated, God bless them, and I hope this book blesses them and helps them in some way. It is a book of fiction, but it's based on actual facts and information directly from the Bible and from the early church fathers. Miss Taylor did a lot of research prior to this, and in her foreword she had said, if you do anything at all, study the Bible and study the early church. And that's all we can ask of everyone. For a starter, I thought I'd share this book with you. This is Eusebius's Ecclesiastical History of the Church. This particular one I just received. It's complete and unabridged, and it's the new updated edition that was translated by C.F. Cruz. This is by Hendrickson Publishers. Now, I purchased this through a reseller on Amazon. I'm sure you could get these in other places. You might even be able to find copies at the library. I'm not sure, depending on what your area is. But Eusebius was titled the father of the history of the church, early church, and he covers most of the things that happened in the 300 years after Jesus' death. And what he was trying to do at his time in his life was the church was being persecuted by Rome and by other persecutors. And what he was trying to save documents that they had been using for a long time and trying to clarify what was accurate and what was not. What translations had been twisted to other people's agendas, and pointing those out so that people are not mistaken as to the true Gospels. And so it was a historical book. It's meant to clarify what the teachings of the church were at that time, who were martyred, who were not, who replaced the bishops of the church as they were formed, and as they were martyred. And so it's very, very essential to learning about the early church, the early Christians, and how they celebrated their services, and why they chose Sunday to be the day that the Christians should be celebrating as the Sabbath instead of the traditional Saturday. Why they switched to Sunday, because it was quote unquote the Lord's Day. So this is a very essential book. There are other ones referenced, Josephus and Irenaeus. A lot of these earlier writings have been translated directly from the original Greek, and so it's very essential to truly understanding the early church. And in my case, the connection that early church and the Catholic Church today is the one continuous church that has never gone away since the days after Christ died. So we'll continue now with part 3, Apostle to the Gentiles. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Chapter 35. It seemed incredible to Joseph of Arimathea that the sun-darkened man before him was Saul of Tarshish. He peered at Saul with age-dimmed eyes, and his mouth moved soundlessly in the way of very old men, as if chewing, and his white beard fluttered on his chin. It was hot and still in Jerusalem today, and the sky was white with heat, and the cypresses were dusted with golden particles, and not even the fountains in the gardens could cool the burning air. Yet Joseph was wrapped in woolen shawls, and his feet were covered with high boots lined with sheep wool, and he rubbed his hands as if they were chill. If he was aghast at Saul's appearance, Saul was even more aghast at the ruin of the splendid man he had last seen only 5 years ago. But, thought Saul, did I believe that time stood still here while centuries rose and fell in my mind, and nations appeared and vanished, and the revelations of heaven shafted down on me in fire in the deserts of Arabia? Joseph was aging when I last saw him, but I did not perceive it. Now the years have revealed themselves. Have I changed also so stringently? I am 33 years old, no youth a you, but neither am I old with a beard. He looked at his hands, and they were almost as black as a Nubian's, and he knew that his countenance was blackened also, in spite of his once fair complexion, and that he must appear as an African lion with his great mane of red rough hair and rough brown clothing, and his dark feet, and the deep tawny color of his arms and throat and feet. Only his blue eyes were the same, glistening with the powerful force of his spirit, and the passions that had always lived with them. "And what did you do in the Nabatean kingdom?" asked Joseph. "I pursued my trade as a goat's hair weaver and tent maker," said Saul, in that deep, melodious voice that Joseph remembered. "I spoke to the peasants and the farmers of the Messiah. I lived and ate with them." He faintly smiled, and his large white teeth flashed. I was never a man for luxuries, nor was I ever a voluptuary. But I had been taught, as a Jew, to cleanse myself frequently. Those with whom I have been dwelling were not so fastidious. "So I observe, through my nose," said Joseph, and chuckled. "All the perfumes of Persia could not wash away the redolence that attends you, Saul, though I am certain you have bathed much recently." "I fear I still smell like a camel and a goat, and possibly of dung and sour milk and cheese." Saul lifted one of his sinewy hands and sniffed at it consideringly. "Yes, it is true. There are times when I bathed as infrequently as my poor and simple companions, out of necessity. Too, it is not always wise to appear singular." It is also dangerous," said Joseph, meditating over what Paul had already told him. He saw that the winds and the dust of the terrible deserts had scoured Saul's flesh, had melted away any suggestion of fat, and had reduced his body to leather and whips and sinews and ligaments and hard rope. Yet never had he appeared so young. No, not even in those days long ago when he had visited Jochanan ben Zachary in the desert, in the wilderness. Nor had there been this peace upon his countenance. It was not the placid peace of resignation to the will of God, not the peace of saintliness and gentle forbearance or mysticism, not the peace of withdrawal. His resolute chin was as sharp in contour as if a sculptor had made the line and had forbore to round and soften it. And his nose was thin and large like a knife, and there were hollows under his cheekbones like dry blackened pits, and the cheekbones thrust out from his face. If ever a man had been seasoned and honed and tempered by God, Saul was such a man, and yet there was about him his very youthful humor, so missing for so many years, and a strong but not mawkish gentleness. "And the Arabians hearkened to you, my son?" asked Joseph. "They were courteous, like all the dwellers of the desert, who must live or perish by courtesy. But they told me a seer had long foretold that they, the sons of Ishmael, would have their own revelation. For an instant, his old impatience sparked in his eyes. I'm going to add a footnote. The sons of Ishmael were the sons of Abraham's first son with the handmaiden, and not the one with his wife Sarah. And so these were the people who became the Muslims. Joseph considered. Then he said, I am old and forgetful, and so I cannot remember where once I learned that one could imagine God, blessed be his name, as a wheel of infinitude, sparkling and turning in lightning and in thunder, and luminous fire and incomprehensible power, and that while he was the wheel, he was also the hub, and all the spokes leading from the rim to the hub were the powerful hopes and faiths of all creation. And as the spokes were also God, as was the rim and the hub, they all led to the center. Saul himself considered and frowned thoughtfully. He said, We have been given a new covenant, as told to Jeremiah centuries ago, and there is none else. Joseph chewed soundlessly on nothing before he replied, I believe Jeremiah also related that one day all men would know the Lord, through perhaps he was and is called by 1,000 different names, and he will not distinguish among his children. Ages before Moses brought us the commandments, Egypt had a code of moral and religious laws not too dissimilar, and so did the Persians. And though the Greeks and the Romans based their moral and religious laws on ethics, merely the spirit shines through. Saul moved restlessly. Was it for this that he had endured the dark, hot years in the desert and other sufferings merely to listen to a senile old man who had lost the iron in his soul? While he was pondering, Joseph gazed at him and sighed, and realized that the new Saul was not truly new at all, but a man constantly wrestling with his own storms. We are a peculiar people, said Joseph. God has chosen us from the ages, and will not depart from us, and that makes us peculiar. Saul thought this extremely irrelevant and another sign of Joseph's senility, and he struggled again for the charity he was always proclaiming, though he frequently acknowledged that he had much need of it himself. Joseph said gently, To each people God sends his revelation in accordance with their nature and ability to understand in their own terms and in their own souls. Though it has been said that all men are the same, that is not entirely true, just as one man is different from his brother. We share the same flesh and the same being, and are the same species, as Aristotle noted, but each people has its own arete. I have traveled. I have spoken long to the wise men of China and India, and to their people. Their minds are not our minds, nor do they contemplate creation as we contemplate it. Nor are their Moors ours. They worship God in the name they have given him. And will he deny them his salvation? No. You have told me that one of the apostles, Simon Peter of Galilee, told you that the Messiah commanded him and his fellows to go forth and feed his sheep in all nations. But how those nations will accept the message and in what form is their own, and we must not quarrel with it. The form given us by the Messiah is the form sympathetic with our natures and our minds, purely to be understood by the faithful of Israel, and among the Gentiles of Greece and Rome, and even perhaps the wildernesses of the barbarians of Gaul and Britain and the cold nations of the north. It is not alien to the minds of us, these places on earth. The ground has already been prepared. Yet to all nations and all peoples was the message given. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But who shall quarrel with the name, and what men herald it? He is truly wandering, thought Saul. But Joseph was smiling. He was remembering how he had heard that none in Damascus among the Jews would accept Saul's new and fervent teaching, saying to his face and among themselves, "Is this not the servant of the Romans, a fierce and ravening Jew, who imprisoned and flogged our brothers in Jerusalem, because they believed that the Messiah had been born to us? Shall we trust him? No, he is a spy of the Romans. He comes to us now in pretense that he might trap us and then bind us and imprison us and slay us. Begone with him." So they had spoken and had incited the cynical Greeks in Damascus against Saul and others of the Gentile community. And to save his life, Saul had To save his life, Saul had to be lowered in a basket at midnight over the walls of Damascus, and had fled into the desert. To one so proud, that must have been a humiliating and disastrous experience. To be rejected was intolerable, especially when one believed he brought the truth. Ah, Saul thought Joseph with love, and smiled again. Seeing that smile, Saul thought that he was being mocked. The young man said with sternness, "The world is in bondage to the Roman. The world is oppressed by Rome. There is not a man who can today say, 'I am free on my own earth, in my own house, safe from tyranny and taxes, free of government hirelings who torment me with inquisitive questions and puny malicious laws. A man free before the face of God.' From this oppression and tyranny the Messiah came to deliver us." He paused with sudden angry impatience, for the old man was slowly shaking his head. "My son," said Joseph, "the world of men has always been in bondage, oppressed by some powerful nation or even its own permitted government. No man has ever been truly free for long, safe from taxes and impudence, malicious bureaucrats and wars and massacres and seizures and outrages. It has been said by the Greeks that men deserve their government, and I have seen nothing in my lifetime to refute this. If men are now slaves, it was by their own complacent acquiescence, their own meek weakness, their own greed and slovenly character, their own pridelessness, their own envy. It has also been said that if a mouse accept a morsel from a tiger, in apparent amity and charity, the tiger will soon make a morsel of the mouse for himself. Was it not the Chinese who declared that governments are more to be feared than a tiger? So the world of bondage today is no different than the world of bondage under the Egyptians and under Alexander of Macedonia. Nor will it be changed tomorrow. It will always be in bondage. But if a man says in his soul, though his hands are manacled, 'I am a free spirit, and the iron of man cannot manacle that spirit,' then he is not truly a slave. It was that freedom of the spirit that the Messiah brought to us, and the nations who will hear him. For did he not say, when taunted by the rigorous Pharisees and shown a coin with the head of Caesar upon it, 'Render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things which are God's'? To him, blessed be his name, governments are forever oppressive and bloody and ambitious, and their nature cannot be changed. For men who receive power become devils. But only a man himself can make himself a slave in his soul. From that slavery he should deliver us. Caesar will eternally be Caesar. A man can only rise from his knees and know Caesar to be mad, and to refrain from giving Caesar all the power he covets." In spite of himself, something impelled Saul to listen, as he would not have listened some years ago. And again he pondered, and he rubbed his dark and seamed forehead. He murmured, "It is true. Only God can give us true liberty. Still, we should fight for freedom against bloody and ambitious and ravenous governments." "That is also our duty," said Joseph. "It is a duty laid upon man from the beginning. Did not Moses shout, 'Proclaim liberty throughout the land and unto the inhabitants thereof'? Yes, but man forgets. Bread and ease and security are the tawdry prizes offered for his freedom as a man, and without fail, throughout the history of the ages, he will accept those prizes." Saul thought of the insane Caesar, now on the throne in Rome, and shuddered. Was it not rumored, with loud laughter, that he had made his horse a consul of Rome? "We are on the eve of terrible events," said Saul. "We always were. We shall always be," said Joseph in his weariness. He fell asleep, and Saul rose in silence and left him, and he went to the street of the tent makers, where he had begun again to ply his trade, and to dream his great dreams and plot his fight. We'll continue with part 2 of chapter 30.